First love is like a flower on a lofty mountain. As a neighbor, childhood friend, and admirer, I stayed by his side year after year. During my college years, I was diagnosed with severe depression due to rumors. It was him who stayed by my side without leaving, clarified things for me, and took meticulous care of me. After graduation, he proposed to me. I thought there was no reason not to say yes to him. On the wedding day, after the vows, he leaned close to me and said he had a surprise for me. Then, let out a low sigh. The large screen lit up. I thought it would show our beautiful memories. But reality slapped me hard in the face. On the large screen, I was lying on the bed, unconscious and with a flushed face. And there were several men around me, laughing lewdly. I was struck with shock and stood there dumbfounded. The guests at the scene kept sighing, and the harsh words constantly assaulted my eardrums. I screamed and ran away. With nowhere to go, I could only run to the rooftop. Blake also came, and he only said one sentence: "Do you also feel Viper's pain?" I didn't understand what he meant, but instinctively knew that he was behind all this. I pounced on him and started fighting with him. He seemed not to expect me to do this, and could only be forced to tussle with me. In the chaos, I fell off the rooftop with him. Unexpectedly, when I opened my eyes again, I returned to that turning point of fate. The dazzling light shone on me. I blinked. Although I still remembered the pain of my bones breaking in my mind, my head was unusually clear. Since I had depression, I rarely felt so lighthearted. Hey, I'm asking you a question. What do you think of Blake? Viper played with a knife, looking unfriendly, just like a typical little hooligan girl. Viper? Is this really Viper? Seeing that I didn't answer, Viper looked very annoyed and stepped forward to push me, making me stagger. Four-eyed guy. Do you want to die? I'm asking you a question. If you don't answer, I'll cut out your tongue. Believe it or not. She looked at me, and her beautiful face was full of malice, just like a rotten and stinking rose. In my previous life, Viper kept pestering Blake. Even though Blake refused her countless times, she never gave up. There were many admirers of Blake, and Viper wanted to interrogate them one by one and then warn them to stay away from him. However, in this entanglement, Blake began to sink, and his relationship with Viper also heated up. As a person as unattainable as a flower on a lofty mountain, Blake instinctively felt that he shouldn't degenerate. Every time he made up his mind not to contact Viper anymore, he couldn't help but think of the way Viper begged him with tears in her eyes and her warm and unrestrained smile. Finally, having fulfilled way, he got together with Viper. They smoked together, went to bars, raced on the roads, and kissed in the alleys. During the intense senior year of high school, they wantonly squandered their youth, as if this was what freedom looked like. Everyone was intoxicated while I alone was sober. Maybe that's what they thought. In my previous life, the two of them finally reached an irreparable situation. Viper was pregnant. She asked Blake to give up his studies for her. Blake's parents from his family begged me to help, saying that Blake and I grew up together since childhood, and he would always listen to me to some extent. Seeing the two elderly people lower their status and bow to me, I softened my heart. I found an opportunity to talk to Blake and persuaded him not to give up his studies and his future. He listened to me, but I got into huge trouble because of this. One day after school, I was knocked unconscious by two hooligans. When I opened my eyes, I was on the rooftop of an abandoned building. With red eyes, Viper slapped me hard several times, and then kicked me in the abdomen. I cried out in pain, but she just grabbed my hair and dragged me. She dragged me to the edge of the floor and roared, "My child is gone. Aurora, you must be very happy, right? Blake gave up on me and chose you." I wanted to defend myself, but it was too painful. What I said was intermittent, and before I could finish, she threw me downstairs, and I lost consciousness. After that, I was found and sent to the hospital. Fortunately, having fulfilled Lee, the floor wasn't too high, and I only had a concussion and a broken leg bone. Viper was also arrested and sent to prison. I heard that after she was released from prison, She found a new boyfriend. Her boyfriend was involved in the underworld and sent her to the hospital by playing around with her. And then there was no news about her. No. Facing Viper's question, I tried my best to stay calm. Oh, you mean this? He's just my neighbor. Viper seemed very dissatisfied with my answer. Is that all? Nothing else? Nothing else. Viper sneered a few times. So he's just a neighbor. That's why you go to and from school together every day. She held a knife and poked my shoulder with the tip of the knife. Stay away from Blake in the future. He's the one I like. Got it? I quickly nodded. Under my gaze, Viper left triumphantly on her motorcycle. I touched the place that was poked by the tip of the knife and secretly swore in my heart. Blake, cutting filth way sigh. Viper. You two better not let me find an opportunity. Otherwise, I'll avenge both the new and old grudges together. With the joy of being reborn, I happily set foot on the way home from school and spent the night with a nervous heart. When I opened my eyes in the morning, I finally let out a sigh of relief. It was true. It was really true. When I went to school for class, I found that there were only a few people in the classroom. It should be the time for morning reading. But there was no one in the class. I can't remember a lot of things from my previous life. And I really don't understand what the situation is now. Fortunately, my desk mate, helper, answered my question. Viper was confessing her love to Blake, and she even used the school broadcast. Helper whispered to me, I heard that Viper even dragged Blake in. Listening to the sounds. They even did that. I was shocked. Did what? You know. That thing. She gesticulated with her hands and feet. Seeing that I still didn't understand, she pouted and brought her big face close to mine. Come on. I quickly covered her mouth with my hand. I get it. As soon as I finished speaking, a large group of people suddenly poured into the classroom. Helper and I quickly sat down properly. After a commotion, when everyone sat down, 2 seats were left empty in the classroom. The classmates in the class began to whisper. The principal and the head teacher soon came in, followed by Blake and Viper. The principal took the lead in walking onto the podium and questioned the 2 who had made a ruckus in the broadcasting room. What did you do by using the loudspeaker in the broadcasting room without permission? Explain it clearly yourselves. Don't make me ask one by one. After saying that, the principal was so angry that he thumped his chest. The head teacher was also very angry and quickly chimed in beside him. Blake, tell me, did Viper threaten you? It was obvious that even after such a thing happened, the head teacher still didn't want to give up on Blake, the top student, or in his eyes, all of this was Viper's fault. It was the bad student who lured the good student, which made Blake degenerate like this. Blake frowned, and there was still a blush on his face that hadn't faded. He opened his mouth, but finally didn't say anything. That's right. For a cold and aloof person like him, it would be better to just kill him than to let him talk about what had just happened. It was Viper who spoke first. I kissed him. So what? He's always walking around in front of me with a stern face. Isn't he just asking to be kissed? Wow. Suddenly, a huge amount of discussion and chatter broke out in the classroom. I saw with sharp eyes that Blake's ears were almost completely red. The principal slapped the podium several times. Quiet. The classroom suddenly fell silent, and the principal pointed at Viper with a trembling finger. Judging from your tone, you're quite proud of it. Aren't you? You've led the good student astray. And you're even proud of it. Blake then finally spoke. I did it voluntarily. The combination of a handsome man and a beautiful woman always makes everyone pay attention involuntarily. The discussion in the classroom was even louder than before. In the noisy classroom, the principal's face turned red, whether from anger or embarrassment. He stomped out of the classroom, and his roaring voice could still be heard at the door. Call all your parents. Looking at the relaxed atmosphere in the classroom, I felt a bit puzzled. It had been a while since the Viper incident, and everyone was still chatting and laughing. Moreover, there was no sign of the teacher coming to class at all. Some classmates went out and didn't come back. I elbowed Helper beside me. Why hasn't the teacher come to class yet? Helper looked at me strangely. Are you so absorbed in studying that you become silly? Top student? She touched my forehead. You don't have a fever. These days are the school sports meeting. Missy. No wonder Viper could enter the broadcasting room so easily. It seems that I still need to think more about what happened in my previous life. When facing Blake and Viper, there are some things I have to be on guard against. While I was lost in thought, Helper suddenly grabbed my wrist. Aurora. If you keep studying like this, you won't really become a bookworm. Will you? As she spoke, she pulled me and ran outside. Come on. Sister will take you to see something nice. I was dragged by her and was a bit out of breath. Helper. Don't run so fast. I can't catch my breath. Helper pulled me to a wall. There was a large window in the middle of the wall, and one could see inside clearly from the outside. The window of the principal's office was broken a few days ago, and a new piece of glass was installed. But it was installed upside down. People inside couldn't see outside, but people outside could see inside. The teachers and students of the whole school tacitly didn't say anything about this. In the principal's office, having fulfilled my obsession, Blake and Viper were standing side by side, and Blake's parents had also come. They were explaining to the principal with pale faces. This matter really isn't what you think. Our Blake definitely won't be unable to distinguish right from wrong because of such a person. Blake's mother almost burst into tears. Her son was clearly well behaved and sensible. How could he make a mistake at such a crucial moment? This would ruin all his efforts over the years. Blake's father also bent his back, and his gray hair added a touch of sadness to him. I'm really sorry. This child has caused such a big trouble. It's my fault for not educating him well. Viper's face also didn't look good. Her bright and flamboyant face was now full of impatience. Come on. If you were that obedient, would I have been able to win him over? In response to her, Blake's mother slapped her. There was a crisp sound of the slap. Viper was stunned. And then she burst into a roar. You old woman. How dare you hit me? Do you want to die? Seeing this, Blake stood between the two of them. On one side was Viper scratching, and on the other side was Blake's mother scolding. Blake's face was full of nail marks scratched by Viper. At this moment, he couldn't maintain his aloof demeanor anymore and roared, "Stop making a scene." The scene suddenly fell silent. Helper took the opportunity to laugh in my ear. Wow. This scene isn't a complete mess. I echoed a few times to show that I heard her, and my eyes kept glancing inside. In the end, this farce ended with Blake writing a self-criticism and Viper receiving a punishment. Maybe in the principal's heart, Blake was still a good candidate. A day passed quickly. I was packing my school bag when a hand tapped lightly on my desk. I looked up and saw that it was Blake. When facing me, he returned to his usual haughty demeanor, and his thin lips parted slightly. Aurora. Let's go together after school later. I could tell from his tone that it was an order, not a request. He probably thought that I was still the same Aurora who used to follow him around eagerly. No. Every time I see him, I want to gouge out his eyes and use them as ping-pong balls. Just as I was about to refuse, I suddenly felt a strong sense of discomfort, as if I was being spied on. I looked to the side and saw that it was Viper. The venomous look in her eyes made me shiver. But the moment she saw Blake, she smiled again, stood up, and left. Blake hadn't walked with me for a long time. Since he met Viper. Every day after school, he either went to a bar or accompanied Viper for a stroll. This was the first time he had said he wanted to walk with me. It was really strange. I wanted to refuse him, but Viper's smile made me feel that something was wrong. In the end, I still chose to walk with him. I actually wanted to hear what kind of nonsense he could come up with. If I couldn't stand what he said, I would definitely slap him directly. It was already very late when we got home. There weren't many people on the road after the senior year of high school classes ended. Most of my classmates chose to live in the dormitory directly, which was time-saving and convenient. Until we were almost at my doorstep, Blake still hadn't said a word. With the experience of my previous life, my temper had become visibly irritable. I said loudly with a look of disgust, "You can't say a word even if you're beaten with 8 sticks." Seemingly surprised that I had said a swear word, Blake frowned and reprimanded me in a low voice. "Don't swear. I stared at him in surprise. Blake. Did a donkey kick your head? You smoke, drink. Out to bars. And fight. Now you can't stand others swearing? Sure enough. After I said that, I saw a crack appear in his pretentious haughty image, and his face twisted for a moment. He sighed and looked at me helplessly. I hadn't done any of the things you mentioned. Don't wrong me casually. He smiled softly and tried to pat my head as he used to. I sidestepped to avoid his hand. He looked very disappointed. Aurora. You've changed. You wouldn't have treated me like this before. Is the past important? Anyway, we can't go back to it. I shrugged inferiorly. Seeing that he still seemed to want to reminisce about the past, I interrupted him directly. Let's be straightforward. Okay? Only then did Blake remember that he had something to ask. He hesitated for a while. Just when I was getting annoyed and wanted to retort at him again, he reluctantly opened his mouth. Aurora. Did you like me before? I was stunned on the spot by his question. The answer was no. In my previous life, after he was called to the office with his parents, I took the initiative to ask him to go home together. I babbled on for a long time. When we parted, I even told him that I would always be there for him whenever he needed me. Since I had said that, it definitely meant that I liked Blake. However, in this life, after he got into trouble, I hadn't paid attention to him for a long time. Why would Blake, who now had a girlfriend, ask such a question? Thud, a dull sound came from behind, as if someone had fallen. And as soon as Blake heard it, his expression immediately became flustered, and he couldn't wait to leave me and run over. In this situation, there was nothing I didn't understand. Presumably, Viper had asked Blake to ask me this. She just wanted to seek a sense of existence from me through Blake to prove that the two of them were true lovers. This was really too much. Having a second chance, I didn't want to pay attention to this crazy couple. I stretched out my index finger and wagged it in front of him. No. I don't like you. Blake, please don't be so self-absorbed in front of me. No, don't be self-absorbed in front of everyone. Get that straight. Okay? I continued with a look of disgust. There are indeed many people who like you, but not everyone likes you. Understand this. Will you? In the past, I would have said yes. But now I just want to beat him up. When Blake heard these words, his face turned pale and then red, as if he was changing the expressions on a painted face. I found it rather amusing. Ouch. Another exclamation came from the darkness. This time, he didn't care about anything else and walked quickly in the opposite direction. Anyway, having fulfilled my obsession, Viper's goal should have been achieved. The next day, I arrived at school early. I looked at my desk. It was clean and tidy. In my previous life, because I didn't keep a distance from Blake, I completely offended Viper. And that was the beginning of my being bullied. There were endless dead rats and stinky garbage thrown into the desk hole, and words like mistress and bitch were carved on the desk. There were also times when I was suddenly drenched with water when I went to the toilet. Similar things happened one after another. Fortunately, none of those things happened this time. As soon as I sat down in my seat, Viper came in. She was wearing a modified school uniform. Her long skirt had been changed into a short skirt, and the loose style had been altered to be extremely tight, setting off her curvy figure. On her beautiful oval face, she had applied delicate smoky and heavy makeup, looking bright and ostentatious. This was the youthful aura that Blake liked. Free and unrestrained. Viper didn't go to her own seat but walked straight towards me. Since I was sitting in the inner row, she came over and plopped down on helper's seat. She had a lollipop in her mouth and gave me two disdainful looks. Don't let me hear you say any more bad things about Blake, or you'll be in trouble. After saying that, she turned around and walked out of the classroom. She should have heard the words I said to Blake last night. So she came to warn me. Compared to the ambiguous words in my previous life, the straightforward rejection in this life was obviously more to her liking. Maybe what I said was too harsh. And Viper thought it would hurt Blake's pride, so she specifically came to warn me. I looked at the place where Viper had sat and thought to myself that I must remind Helper to wipe the desk later. Without the interference of that crazy couple, My days were peaceful and smooth. I led a to point one line life. Either in the classroom or in the cafeteria. Feeling fulfilled and happy. Helper was being extremely mischievous and poking my arm to play. Days are passing by like this. It's really boring. I don't think so. I replied while looking at my wrong questions. Doing some exercises. Memorizing books. And getting into a good university. It gives me a great sense of accomplishment. In my previous life, when I was being bullied, I still had Helper to help me. So my life wasn't particularly difficult. So in this life, as a repayment, I must urge Helper to study hard. As soon as she heard my words, Helper immediately started complaining. No. I've already done 2 sets of physics papers and 1 set of math papers. I really can't take it anymore. You're almost exhausting me. I flicked her on the forehead. What nonsense are you talking? Just asked you to look at the collection of wrong questions. Okay? Helper immediately put on a smiling face. Thank you, my dear Aurora, for sparing my life. Even when looking at the collection of wrong questions, she wouldn't stay idle. She was still muttering about the latest gossip, most of which was about Blake and Viper. Viper and Blake had a car race and hit someone. Blake had covered up for his lover and was going to take the blame. But the surveillance video wouldn't lie. And the 2 of them were both detained. There was also the incident where Blake was forced by his parents to cut off contact with Viper. And the so-called top student actually knelt down in front of his parents on the spot. And another thing. Helper became more and more excited as she spoke. It's recently been rumored that Viper cuckolded Blake. And Blake caught her in the act. I was taken aback for a moment. Cuckolded? Who did she cuckold? These things were obviously different from what happened in my previous life. And I even began to doubt the authenticity of this world. I secretly pinched my palm. And the pain told me that all of this was real. So was this the butterfly effect? Because of my different reactions, it had affected the development of other things? After all, I wasn't bullied in this life either. I quietly listened to help her tell the following story. It turned out that when the 2 of them first started dating, Viper began to flirt with other men, some of whom were even from the underworld. Even though the top student brought 3 or 4 people with him, they were all beaten so badly that they couldn't get up. Helper took a sip of water to moisten her throat and continued. I heard that Blake even broke a leg. On a whim, I asked, which leg? This time, it was Helper's turn to be stunned. She was both embarrassed and ashamed and gave me 2 hard punches. In my heart, I was muttering to myself that this Blake really had a tough life. He didn't even die in such a situation and was still alive. I always felt that my days wouldn't be so peaceful. My guess was right. Sure enough, Blake came to find me. He sat in a wheelchair with a gloomy expression. And his eyes were not as calm and self-controlled as before. There was a fierce and confident look in them. The dean wants to see you. Come with me. There were also several students who came with Blake, all of them wearing expressions of eagerness to watch the show. I hadn't figured out the situation yet. Just as I was about to open my mouth to ask, I was interrupted by Blake. You'll know when we get there. I was still a bit worried. Helper, are you free? Accompany me for a while. Helper immediately agreed. Our group was so large and eye-catching that more and more people joined in to watch the fun one after another. When we arrived at the door of the dean's office, I felt a little more at ease. Fortunately, they didn't tie me up and take me to the grove behind the hill or lock me in the sports equipment room. But with all this commotion, what exactly had I done wrong? The group of people spontaneously lined out and stood at the door, all of them in the attitude of watching the show. I turned the doorknob. The door was only half open when I heard the dean's angry roar. You really want to ruin the school's reputation completely. I opened the door and walked in. Did you want to see me? The dean was obviously taken aback when he saw me come in. And his face was full of confusion. What are you doing here? Then Blake came in. There was a smile on his lips. But no matter how I looked at it, there was a hint of cruelty in it. Dean, I brought the person you asked me to bring. The situation became chaotic. 2 people who clearly didn't know how the story would unfold and 1 person who thought he had everything under control were standing in the same room. Wait. Blake, are you sure you didn't get the wrong person? The dean scratched his hair irritably, and then looked at Blake again. Wasn't the person you were supposed to bring Viper? Why did you bring Aurora here? Blake was obviously flustered. But he still insisted. That's right. The person who was with me that night was Aurora. And I brought her here. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. I interrupted this conversation that was like a riddle. Director Lee. Can you tell me what exactly happened? Why did you suddenly call me here? Only then did Director Lee turn to look at me and start to explain. A few days ago, a video suddenly went viral on the internet. In the video, a girl checked into a hotel room with several men at the same time. And the scene was really unsightly. The title of the video was very eye-catching. In No. 1 Middle School of City A girl battles 10 men. And her boyfriend catches her in the act. This was probably the scene of Blake catching someone in adultery that Helper had mentioned. No. 1 Middle School of City A was the very school I was standing in. I still didn't understand. What did this have to do with me? Before Director Lee could continue, Blake spoke up. The person in the video is Aurora. And I can testify to that. No. I was simply stunned and couldn't believe what I had heard. I vigorously dubbed my ears. Could you say that again? I said. Blake paused. The person in the video is Aurora. There was a clear sound of surprise from outside the door. Director Lee frowned. These students really have nothing better to do these days. They just love listening to gossip. After saying that, he quickly went out to shoo people away to avoid any rumors from spreading. In this interval, Blake wheeled his wheelchair up to me. Aurora, I know you might feel a bit wronged by what I'm saying. After this period is over, shall we be together? Blake said a lot of inexplicable things. In essence, having fulfilled my obsessions. He wanted me to admit that the leading actress in the video was me. And as compensation, he would be with me, and so on. What on earth was wrong with him today? I knew that ever since Blake became unrestrained and left freedom, his mind had been a bit abnormal. But I never expected him to say such despicable things. Trying to ruin my reputation. Soon, let out a low sigh. Director Lee had closed the door and came over. So in front of him, I repeated what Blake had just said. At the end, I stared straight at Blake. Blake. I'll say this to you again. I don't like you. I just treat you as a neighbor. It's impossible for me to admit something I didn't do. Got it? After hearing this, Director Lee was so angry that his beard and eyes were bulging. Blake, adding fulfilled by sigh. You out a low sigh. You. Seeing that he couldn't finish his sentence, I finished the rest for him. You're simply heartless. Right. Director Lee looked at Blake and then at me. And finally decided to let me go. Before I left, I reminded him. Director, this is already a case of spreading rumors. I hope you can handle it fairly and not let your students down. The solution given by Director Lee was quite good. Blake was given a major demerit, which was recorded in his file. He had to write a self-criticism during the flag-raising ceremony on Monday and apologize to me in public. As I expected, the school wasn't going to cover up for a student who was gradually degenerating. Blake's previous grades were on a par with mine. And he was always among the top 5 in the grade. Very stable. But during this period, as the incident with Viper fermented, his grades plummeted to outside the top 500. Blake was probably going to be completely given up by the school. During this time, Blake came to see me. The first thing he asked me was, "Are you reborn too?" I wasn't very surprised to hear this. Some of Blake's current expressions and habitual movements were things he developed later in the previous life. After thinking about it a bit, I knew that he had also come back. Before I could say anything, Blake had a pained expression on his face. He looked at me affectionately and murmured, "Don't blame me. This is all what you owe Viper." Oh? When did I ever owe her anything? I stared at him in disgust. The two of you don't learn well. One is brave enough to do it, but the other is too cowardly to admit it. You two are just bullying an honest person like me. And in the end, you even make excuses for yourselves. You're a wimp, a coward. Even a beast knows how to be a better person than you. Go find a place to bury yourself already. After scolding him like this, I turned around and left. I felt disgusted just looking at his face for one more second. Now I understood why he wanted me to take the blame for Viper. It turned out that he was reborn. He naively thought that I was still the little girl who liked him and followed him in the previous life. I remembered the gossip that Helper had told me again. It seemed that Blake hadn't been reborn for long. Otherwise he wouldn't be unaware of how extremely bad his and Viper's reputations were. In the previous life, Blake and Viper were also so reckless. I patiently explained to others over and over again that Blake wasn't that bad and that he was a nice person, asking everyone not to make wild speculations. So, everyone didn't have a bad impression of Blake. But instead of being grateful, Blake blamed me for meddling in his business. I kindly persuaded him on behalf of Blake's parents. He himself had agreed to finish his studies first, but in the end, I was still the target of Viper's revenge. It's really hard not to suspect that Blake said something to Viper. Even when Viper threw me downstairs, Blake still didn't let me go. He had been scheming for so many years by my side, deliberately finding people to spread rumors about me and insult me to show how affectionate he was. He just didn't want to blame himself for Viper's death. He was both incompetent and unwilling to take responsibility, so he found me as a scapegoat. He really had a good plan. This time around, I won't meddle in their affairs anymore. Let them bear the consequences of their own misdeeds. Despite all my precautions, I was still kidnapped. Just after school in the evening. At the moment when I was about to enter my home, a club hit me on the head. I immediately blacked out and lost consciousness. When I opened my eyes, I was in a dilapidated abandoned building. This was the very place where Viper had thrown me off the rooftop in the previous life. There was a burning pain all over my body. It seemed that many places on my body had been abraded, and my hands were tied to a chair. It was exactly the same as what happened to me in the previous life. There was a sound of footsteps. I looked up, and it was Viper. Next to her was Blake in a wheelchair. Viper lifted my chain with her hand. Her makeup was messy, and she looked crazy. Scared silly? She slapped me in the face, and a searing pain immediately shot through my face. I really hate you goody-two-shoes. You pretend to be so high and mighty. I'm going to step on all of you into the mud. She looked at Blake beside her. Hey, having fulfilled what I. Did you send the message I asked you to send? Yeah. I sent it, Blake said to Viper. Only then did I realize that besides the two of them, there was no one else here. It seemed that the course of events was still a bit different from that in the previous life. Seeing that I was lost in thought, Blake explained to me, Aurora, this time Viper just wants to teach you a lesson. After this, she won't bother you anymore. I was shocked by these words. It was hard to imagine that these words could come out of the mouth of a person with normal intelligence. Before I could speak, I was interrupted by Viper's laughter. Blake, why are you so gullible? Viper laughed wildly, and her limbs couldn't help but tremble. She walked slowly towards Blake, lowered her head, and looked into his eyes. Of course I didn't just bring people here to teach her a lesson, Viper said with a smile on her face. I also want one of her kidneys. I was shocked. But I didn't show it on my face and silently listened to their conversation. Blake, do you think I went to all this trouble just to teach her a lesson? Blake's face turned pale, as if he couldn't believe what he had heard. No. That's not it. Viper. I know you just want to teach her a lesson. Right. Viper interrupted Blake. And then take out her kidney. Viper looked down at Blake and pinched his face. The two of them looked at each other. A long time ago, I met a big shot outside. I thought he really liked me. But I didn't expect that he only liked my organs. Blake's face turned deathly pale, and he could only look up at her reluctantly. I knelt down and begged him. I told him that as long as he spared me, I would do anything he asked. He asked me to accompany his brother, and I did it. I lived like a beast without any dignity. Viper's voice gradually choked up, and she looked completely disoriented. But he still wouldn't let me go. He said that if I didn't want to die, I had to find a scapegoat. Later, I targeted you. But I found that I actually fell in love with you. I thought that maybe if we were together, we could leave this place and live somewhere else. But I didn't expect that your damn old hag of a mother wouldn't agree. As if remembering something embarrassing. Viper suddenly slapped Blake hard. Useless coward. I've never seen such a spineless person like you. Seemingly feeling relieved, she continued. I had to look for a scapegoat again. Well. Viper pointed at me. Here she is. I actually have to thank you for that. Of course. I kept you alive just to make you feel the same pain as me. You're the one who gave me hope and then disappointed me. We're going to be together forever. Blake received such a large amount of information all at once, and it was a huge blow to him. He simply couldn't believe that the freedom he had pursued for so long turned out to be nothing but a hoax. He angrily tried to tear at Viper. But unfortunately, being in a wheelchair, he was completely powerless. In the end, he was beaten into submission by a few punches from Viper. He could only rage uselessly where he was. Viper was about to throw a few more punches to vent her anger, when she suddenly let out a muffled groan, fell face down, and fainted straight away. Blake stared at me in shock as I held the stool. And he didn't say a word for a long time. I was panting heavily. Extremely tired. This nightmare that I had had countless times. I had finally shattered it. On this rooftop, I had tried countless times to save myself. And in the end, I could only wake up and cry hysterically. So after I was reborn, I sewed hidden pockets in the cuffs of every piece of my clothing and put razor blades in them. I cut through the ropes and smashed the stool hard at Viper. Aurora. Blake looked at me with a face full of regret. I didn't know. If I had known all this, I would never have treated you like that. He struggled to lift his leg and kicked Viper hard. Yes, heavily too. It's all this bitch's fault. She instigated me. It's all her. I looked at the despicable person in front of me, and silently shook my head. Blake thought I had forgiven him and was overjoyed. Aurora. I knew you would forgive me. Nothing has happened in this life yet. Once we get out of here, everything will be the same as before. We'll be just like in the last life. I swear I'll treat you well. Before he could finish speaking, I turned around and left, leaving only Blake's desperate cries behind. After a while, Blake realized that he couldn't just sit there and wait for his doom. He struggled to push his wheelchair, trying to go down the stairs. If he waited for that group of people to come, he would definitely be finished. Blake pushed the wheelchair with great effort when a pair of feet suddenly blocked his way. He looked up sharply and exclaimed in surprise. Aurora. I knew it. You couldn't bear to leave me behind. Unfortunately, the rest of his words got stuck in his throat. I slowly took out a rusty crowbar from behind me. I swung it at Blake with all my might. Again and again. Not willing to stop. I only stopped and gasped for breath when Blake couldn't even let out a groan of begging for mercy. Now you can't run away. I heard myself say. A scream rang out. I looked in the direction of the sound. And Viper had already woken up. She was looking at me in horror and shouting. Murder! Murder! I ran towards her quickly. I forgot. There's still one more. Viper was so frightened that she lost her wits and desperately dodged my attacks. She let out another scream, twisted her ankle, and fell backward, plummeting down the building. I leaned over and looked down. A large pool of blood spread out beneath Viper's body. I went downstairs, quickly searched Viper's body for my phone, and then called the police. I threw the crowbar into the sewer and ran to a crowded area to take a taxi home. I was still in a state of shock in the taxi. It was only when I felt the driver's scrutinizing gaze that I realized my school uniform was stained with blood. Needless to say, I must have looked in a terrible mess now. When I got home, I found that there were police officers all over the house. It turned out that my parents had waited for me to come home for a long time at night. After asking everyone they knew and finding that no one had seen me, they called the police. I threw myself into my parents' arms and cried uncontrollably. This was the first time I had cried since I was reborn. I had finally changed my destiny. When facing the police's questions, I told them everything I knew, including the fact that Viper had colluded with Blake to contact organ traffickers. As for what happened after I cut the ropes, I just said that they had a fight over the uneven distribution of the spoils. And then I took the opportunity to escape. With nowhere else to go, I could only run to the rooftop. Blake also came. And he only said one sentence. All mine. The next time I heard about Viper and the others was from Helper. Helper was reciting words and chatting with me about the gossip. Viper. You know? I heard that she was thrown naked into the grove. And her life and death are still unknown now. She coughed lightly twice. Seeing that I had a normal expression, she continued, Blake is even worse off. I heard that not only was one of his kidneys cut out, but he was also severely beaten. He's barely hanging on in the hospital. After saying that, despite it being the morning reading time, she gave me a warm and powerful hug. I'll protect you from now on. Yes, having so filled my sigh. I smiled to myself. I have the love of many people. And my future will be bright. The end of the full text.